Hey, folks, this is the progress report for the first Wednesday in the month of June. What a wonderful month June is, you know. It's light out. It's going to be light out when we get out of here, and it'll be light out when we all drive to our homes. It's just a wonderful thing. We should do more of that. And because it's the first Wednesday in June, I am joined, as always I am, on the first Wednesday of the month by my great good friend Lou D'Alessandro, who is either finance chair in the Senate, or if the Democrats don't prevail, as they did not in the last election, he's the ranking member of finance, and therefore has a great say about the state of the New Hampshire budget. A $13 billion two-year budget that we'll be probably launching into life July 1st until June 30th, 2 years after that. And at Lou's suggestion, I called up the best person we could get from the House of Representatives, Representative Mary Jane Walner from Concord, who's been in the legislature, maybe even, has she been in the legislature longer than you, Lou? They can't
I think I'm showing my age now. I probably got there a few years before you, Mary Jane. When did you first get to the House?
Well, 1980.
80. I got there in 1972, so I beat you by a few years.
That's amazing. Think of the legislative history these two fine people have serving us for their $100 a year.
Yeah.
It's just astonishing the caliber of talent and expertise we get to serve the people of New Hampshire. And nothing's more important to the people of New Hampshire, as my friend Lou has frequently said on this show, than the state budget, $13 billion, including, the taxes we raise from our business taxes and various other fees and alcohol sales, rooms and meals, all these things, and the federal contribution to our budget. And it affects every citizen of New Hampshire in one way or another. So the way the budget goes, it starts with the governor's budget address. It goes to the House, where Mary Jane Walner and her finance committee, which is three divisions that deal with this, is almost three separate committees. And they take over, and then the last comes to the Senate, which is, kind of interesting because they get the most up-to-date revenue estimates, so that they can work with the most relevant and updated information, and they get it. And then then there's a budget that can come back to the House. The House can concur, non-concur, or vote for a committee of conference. Most everybody thinks in this case, as in most cases, it's going to end up a committee of conference. But it's very close to being finalized, which it has to be done by June 30th of this year, and presumably sometime before that. So that's our subject for tonight: the state budget. If you're paying property taxes, who doesn't? Whether you own your home or through your rent. If you have people you love in public schools. If you have people with serious problems with mental health issues,
yes.
If you're worried about crime and, whatever. I mean, these are all things that are affected by what these folks do as they work to craft a state budget that can meet our needs and stay within our means. And this year, pretty amazingly, our means are somewhat more, they're rather more expansive and generous than we probably would have imagined a year ago, right, Mary Jane?
They certainly are.
I mean, a year ago, we were looking at an economy in free fall, and yet revenues have stayed extremely strong, and the federal response has been, I think, particularly since the Biden administration, very strong in supporting, states, counties, municipalities with major funding. And so the funds are not there to do significant things to address our needs, but does this budget really do that? I was struck today, as I do every morning. I read the Union Leader. Doesn't take very long. It's a pretty small paper.
You can get through that in a moment's notice.
And reading what some of the key Republican members of the Budget Committee or the budget in the Senate in New Hampshire said. Our budget also emphasized helping small businesses through tax cuts, providing more educational opportunities for low-income families, helping our citizens dealing with mental health and addiction issues, and protecting our treasured natural resources and environment by dedicating more funding to keep our water clean. Senate Finance Committee Chairman Gary Daniels, R. Milford, said Thursday. So what's not to like about it?
Well, as Mary Jane has said often, first of all, thanks so much for coming, and it's nice to see you. We worked together on a budget last year for the last biennium 2 years ago, and I think did a good job. To be honest with you, I think we did more for the people of the state of New Hampshire than has been done in many years, particularly in the social services area, where we funded many things that, because of the pandemic, didn't get done. And that money is hanging out there, and some of it is being used in this current budget scheme, where they're using those dollars to build programs. But I think we had a good budget, and it turned out that we addressed the needs of people, and I think the municipal aid was back in the budget for the first time in many years. And municipal aid is not in this budget, but $20 million a year went back to the communities, and they could spend it any way they wanted. And that was really the keeping of a promise that was made in 1970 when the business profits tax was instituted and revenue sharing was part of that. So we had a good budget. We run into this pandemic, and it really wreaks havoc on the state of New Hampshire. It wreaks havoc on our population, particularly school-age children. I worry about the kids K through 12. It's a sincere worry that I have, and I take calls on a daily basis.
As a lifelong educator.
Yeah. And so I thought we had a good budget. This budget comes along, and we're gonna look at, and we had a good chance to look at the revenues, almost a $200 million in advance, $200 million plus over plan. Yeah. Now, some of that money has to be spent. There's an anomalous back of monies that were earned in 19, and we had to cover those, about $30 million. The payroll protection plan, that's going to be non-taxed, and that's another number that's up there, and it's between maybe 50 and 90 million. But when you look at the picture, there's $100 million over plan that's available to spend, and much of it is spent in this year. So that's a situation that has to be looked at. When you look at the budget, I think, and Mary Jane, I'd love you to comment on these things. I think education's a disaster.
I'm very concerned about.
I'm very concerned about education.
What's happened with education?
I think health and human services, the limits on the number of people you can hire.
Right.
How are those services going to be performed? The SPU is in there at 24 beds. Brought
SPU
forward.
is Secure Psychiatric Unit. Yeah.
And the mental health situation. Sure, there's more help in here, but more help is needed. We're having problems with adults and children getting placement, and these are things to look at in the budget. But I think the most grievous affront, in my opinion, to the people of the state of New Hampshire is the reduction in the business taxes.
Yes. I would agree.
And the elimination of the interest and dividends tax over a 5-year period.
It's going to follow us for many years.
Yeah, it's going to be a killer. And the businesses...
We'll never get those revenues back, I don't think. I mean, it's hard to imagine we ever will. Right. But you know, New Hampshire, tax is the ultimate dirty word. It's a 3-letter word. It's not a 4-letter word. It's become the ultimate dirty word. So, like Gary Daniels says in this piece I just quoted, we're cutting taxes. Everybody applaud.
Well, we're cutting taxes when we don't have to cut taxes. That's the thing. That's the most ironic aspect of all of this. We have businesses that are doing better than they've done for years. The business profits tax revenues are up. The business enterprise tax revenues are up. Interest and dividends are up. The tax on homes, the real estate transfer tax is up. People have a lot of money to spend, and they're buying homes, and the prices are up.
Yeah, the prices are skyrocketing.
So we're in pretty good shape. And the question is, why should you give a tax break to people who need it least? This is following the federal guidelines. Right. You don't need it, but you get it. Those who need it the least, the 66,000 people who pay the interest and dividends tax, you have to be getting a considerable amount of money in interest and dividends. Your basic net worth is quite large, and we're going to eliminate it over the course of 5 years. We'll eliminate it. So I say there are hundreds of millions of dollars that are going to disappear. And you're going to build a budget in the future based on the fact that you have hundreds of millions of dollars less to deal with. I mean, to me, that's bad government.
Yeah.
That's bad government.
And apparently, the only reason to do this is so that Governor Sununu can say, as he runs for whatever office is next, probably Senate, U.S. Senate, can say New Hampshire really has no income tax. Because we don't have general income tax, we don't have general sales tax, but we did have a tax on interest and dividends,
Yes.
which is a form of income tax, but it's on the highest earners who are living not on wages, but on interest and dividends.
Yeah, exactly.
So there they were giving another benefit to the people who need it the least,
Well,
or don't need it at all.
As I said, I think that's the most egregious part of this budget. You know, you can always say good things about a budget. There's always something in there that's
Right.
worth talking about. But when you are playing with the lives of the future, I think that should be of great concern to everybody. Playing with the lives of our children, our grandchildren, their grandchildren. Because once you reduce these taxes, you never raise them again. You just never. And if you eliminate one, how difficult it is to institute another tax.
What concerns me a lot about it, Lou, is that we're not thinking past a 2-year budget.
Yes.
And this has been a problem in New Hampshire for a long time. We don't think about the things we do in this budget are going to reflect into the next 4 years, the next 8 years, the next 20 years. And we need to think about what the ramifications are of doing something like eliminating over the next 5 years, eliminating our interest and dividends tax.
I think it's again, it's almost immoral, and I think the country's in terrible shape. Again, in my opinion, terrible shape. I was telling both of you that as I came over here, I'm watching the evening news, and a 14-year-old and a 12-year-old child have an AK-47, and they have a shootout with the police. A shootout with police. 14-year-old and a 12-year-old.
Oh my gosh, I hadn't even heard that.
And the gun,
Except you mentioned it.
The gun violence all over the country is crazy. And what did we do? Open carry. Not only open carry, but we allow them on ski mobiles. Carry weapons
Exactly.
on ski mobiles. And no more do you have to get a permit to carry
No
a weapon.
permit.
And we went from the Castle Doctrine to stand your ground, and all of these things happening almost simultaneously. To me, we're headed down the wrong path.
We have a call. Hello, caller. Welcome to the Progress Report. We're happy to have you participate. What's your question or comment, please?
My comment is, for years, we have been warehousing our children with psychiatric and behavioral health problems
Right.
in ERs.
You're right.
And they get
Yes.
sicker and they get sicker.
Yeah.
And we're closing the Sununu Youth Service Center in Manchester, and I think it would make an ideal location to relocate the children that have psychiatric needs. It's a beautiful facility, and I'm just wondering, does the state have plans for that piece of property?
Okay.
Well,
That's a very fine question, and I'll turn it over to our guest, and thank you for calling us. I mean, that's a prime piece of property in the city of Manchester, no doubt about it.
it's a prime piece of property. But currently, we have entered into a contract with Hempstead Hospital for our young children. And then another grievous offense. At one time, we kept children at New Hampshire Hospital, which was a terrible thing. It took us 10 years to get them out of there.
Yeah,
In the
So-
adult facility.
Right.
in the old
Right.
Philbrick
We
Center.
now
yeah.
have an arrangement with Hampstead where we send children to Hampstead to get psychiatric treatment. Currently, because of the demand, we still have 10 beds at New Hampshire Hospital. We had to recreate 10 beds at New Hampshire Hospital
Yep.
because of the tremendous need. We've got to do something about that. It's not only children, but it's adults who are having these very serious mental health problems, and we have to deal with them. And I must say this: Heather Moquin is the superintendent of New Hampshire Hospital. I have great respect for her. I think she's
I do
doing
too.
a good job. She's working hard,
Yep.
trying to do things. And again, we gave them a lot of money, Mary Jane, in our budget.
We did, and to the caller's point, I mean, I don't think there have been any final decisions about what will happen with the Sununu Youth Center building. If in fact it does close, it's being, there is a proposal in the Senate budget.
Right. To close
But,
it.
what to do with the facility, I'm not sure that has been decided, though I'm sure there'll be lots of talk about it. But one thing that I find really discouraging about what's happened over the last couple of years is that in our budget, we provided more funding for mobile crisis units,
Yes.
and particularly for children. If you can get help to them at their school, at their home, at their church, at their child care provider, if you can get help to them where they are and in their environment, that is really preferable. Let's try in New Hampshire to prevent children from being hospitalized. Let's try to get services out to children and families before it gets to the point where that kind of a
Sure.
really high level of care is necessary. There will always be children and adults who will need that level, and the state of New Hampshire obviously needs to be ready and able to provide it in appropriate settings. But I think what we really need to do is we need to start focusing on prevention
Exactly.
and getting services out to young people early.
Sure.
Yeah.
I've talked to the superintendent of the New Hampshire Public Schools, and we need social workers in the grammar
Yes.
schools. We need social workers to deal with these situations.
So
that
we're
they
asking
don't-
the
they don't
schools to do
escalate.
so much more than just provide the 3 R's now.
No,
We're
it's about-
asking them to provide,
Right.
We
food
feed
and
'em.
nutrition for people. In Manchester particularly, I think more than any other community in the state, we have so many children that are dependent on free and reduced cost lunches. And, so we're asking the schools to do a lot more than just teach reading, writing, and arithmetic.
Oh, sure, but indeed, remember your child is there for a long period of time. So we feed them breakfast, we feed them lunch, we even give them food to take home with. But that child comes there, has socialization. That's so important to the growth and development
Oh,
of that
yes,
child.
it certainly is.
And what better way to treat that child, get them at the initial stages of problems, than with a social worker at the school who can take them. The mobile crisis centers are very, very important. You can move them in that direction, but you don't have to put them away.
Right.
And when I got into state government, Mary Jane, there were 3,000 people at New Hampshire Hospital.
I lived in
And
in
so
Concord. at
I
the
remember
time,
those
so
days.
I'm
It was
very
put 'em-
familiar with it.
It was put them away and throw the key away. We can't do that.
Yeah.
And Laconia State
Laconia
School
State
also.
School.
Yeah,
We
yeah.
can't. So we've got to find a way to treat them, and there is a methodology to do that. We've got to fund it. We've got to follow up on it. We have it's a responsibility to get it done, and I think that the second crisis that we're approaching is the way the Commissioner of Education is trying to dismantle public education.
Yeah.
You dismantle public education and create this segregationist concept that's been developed, and what have you got?
Yeah.
You got another emerging problem that pits the haves versus the have-nots,
Yeah.
and that's nowhere to go in a free society.
So the
I just wanted to go back to you, Mary Jane, because one of the things I've seen about this budget, it's even in this article, which starts off with such laudatory praise from certain Senate Republicans, namely Senate President Morris and Finance Chair Gary Daniels, and yet they did not fund the requests from the Department of Health and Human Services for certain child care specialists.
Right.
And here we have children who have been, we've all been affected by the pandemic, but I don't think any's been more affected than our children.
Absolutely.
Who, lost the community that they had, which, as Lou says, is socialization. It's our public schools, of which we have many fine public schools throughout New Hampshire, including in Manchester. And they're gone, and now we have children with an overwhelming number of really crisis-level mental issues, and we're not funding the caretakers that could help them.
Right. Yeah, the budget as it came from the governor actually did not include those 22 child protection workers, and the House did not add them back in. though there was obviously a request. People were requesting that they get added back in, and then I don't believe you added them back in the Senate either. And what concerns me about that, we have worked so hard to provide adequate resources to the Department of Health and Human Services for child protection. Over the years, we have provided more and more resources to get them to the point where they can deal with the caseloads and not carry these extremely high caseloads. And now this is a real step backwards to not fund 22 social workers that we're going to need. And I think we don't really know yet. I think we're going to find that when children start coming back to school, they start seeing their teachers, they start again socializing, that we're going to see children who have had some pretty horrendous situations during the pandemic.
Yeah.
And some of that'll come out, and they're going to need child protection services. I think we're going to see an increase in the next several months.
Because I did remember seeing that, when kids were home, most of the reports of, endangerment to children comes through their school contacts.
That's right.
Yes,
And they weren't in
exactly.
school.
Right.
And so there was a huge drop. It doesn't mean there was abuse was ending for children
Right.
at home.
Right. That's-
It probably was still continuing at levels like it has, maybe even worse with the pandemic.
Right. Right.
And so how can people justify not funding these child protection workers, which are going to be so important? I just don't understand it.
I was puzzled by it myself, and I do not understand why the decision was made not to, both by the House and the Senate, to not fund these positions. When we've
Amazing,
worked so
amazing.
hard
Yes.
in the last several years to be sure that we had the resources there for child protection.
Yeah.
I think one positive thing that was done by the Senate was the $50 million back of the budget cut.
Yes.
The Senate did eliminate that.
You
Oh,
did.
that's good.
Yes, I
Yes.
think absolutely that was
Yeah.
that had to be done. I mean, you couldn't stand a $50 million back of the budget cut. On the other hand, they limit the number of employees that you can have at
Right.
Health and Human
Yeah.
Services. So you get one good thing, but you get something to the contrary, and as a result, it's a zero-sum game in many instances. But
So think about this, you two experts. We didn't fund these 22 child protection services positions that seem like they would be more necessary now than they have been maybe ever. And yet we somehow find the way to give $10 million to the victim of the Ponzi scheme known as Financial Resources Management,
Well,
whatever it was,
you know, that's
FRM.
Right.
And I understand those people, didn't get from the state what the state should have given them in protection against this Ponzi scheme, centered in Meredith, New Hampshire. That's true. We fail these folks, but again and again in the House and maybe in the Senate too, there's been attempts to extend some state funding to make up for their losses as investors. And now here it appears in the budget to the tune of $10 million. Now at $13 billion, that doesn't sound like a lot of money, but a million here, a million there, as it begins to add up. And we don't fund 22 child protection services. Can you speak about that?
Well, I was an advocate of getting that money. I really was, and I thought, going back to the hearings that we held, this is when Maggie Hassan was in the Senate. Do you remember that, Mary Jane?
Right. Yes.
She was chairman of the committee that held those hearings, and it seemed like there was some neglect on
There was some
somebody's
real
side.
defalcation,
So there was some problem there.
default on the part of the state. Yeah.
But in the final analysis, when you measure the needs, and you have to make decisions based on the needs, the pandemic changed life dramatically.
Yeah.
And the needs changed dramatically.
Yeah.
And when I see kids in the waiting room at hospitals and being retained there because we can't find a place for them, it just seems to me that's where I have to spend the money.
Yeah.
And that's where the money, in my opinion, should be spent. And I can tell you, having spent, in the last 2 weeks, I've been in the emergency room twice. Once I was in the emergency room for about 6 hours, the second time for a little bit more than that. And I can tell you, they're busy.
Yeah, they
They're,
are.
they're busy, and it's all kinds of cases that are in the emergency room. And, you know, at one time you thought, oh, the emergency room, I go there for, I broke my leg or something of that
Yeah,
nature.
right.
But it's not like that. It's not like that. There are very serious cases in the
Well, it's the
emergency room.
default position you end up when you got no,
That's
no
right.
Where
place
there's no
else
place
to
else
go.
to go.
So-
They have to take you there.
For mental health
And then
issues.
they're going to send you a
physical
bill that'll
health
scare the
issues.
bejesus out of you afterwards,
So,
too.
so what it does is it changes your mind. Now, sure, I have empathy for the FRM people, but I have more empathy for the kids
Yeah.
Yeah.
and people who have dramatic demonstrated needs. And you've got to. I think that the people believe that government will address these problems, and I think there's the immoral aspect of what people see in government today when those problems aren't addressed.
Yeah, I think children are really going to come out of this pandemic. They're going to really be, I think, in a lot of instances, the big losers because
no question.
many of them have lost a year of schooling.
Yes.
Yeah.
Some
Never-
children did fine with being at home and
Well, if they got to
doing it
support a
remotely.
pod with their parents and their
Right.
siblings,
Yeah,
you
it's-
can do all right.
Right.
But, you know,
But
that's not every kid.
For
Yeah,
every
exactly.
that wasn't so for every family, and a lot of families were under a lot of stress. You know, not every child learns that way, and
Yeah.
I think when they do start coming back to school, I think we're going to start to see these problems emerge.
Yeah.
And at the same time that's happening, this budget underfunds education
Yes.
by about $90 million from what the budget is this year for public education. For
Now, when you say
Manchester
it's
alone,
underfunds
that's
it by 90 million, are you talking about the low adequacy
the
formula?
adequacy. Yes, the
Yeah,
adequacy
which is what,
formula.
3,500 or
3,500.
Yeah, you know, when an actual cost
Right.
educated child is, you know,
Much
4
higher.
times that.
But it's $90 million less than we had in adequacy this year. And for a community like Manchester, that will mean probably around an $11 million
It's a significant hit.
significant
really.
amount of funding. At the same time, schools are going to be more in need
Sure.
because the kids are going to come back and have a lot more needs. And
They're gonna have to-
and
they're gonna
they're
have
gonna
to
have
do
to catch up.
There's got to be a real big catch up, right?
A real big catch
There's
up.
normally catch up just over the
Right.
summer vacation, but this is a year
Yeah.
for
Well,
many of them.
It's a lost year, and at the same time, we're talking about the voucher system coming into play.
Yeah.
And the charter schools receiving more money. There's $100 million going to charter schools.
Yeah.
In
Even
this
as many of them
budget.
are closing because they simply
we see them
can't,
closing.
cut it.
Yeah. Well, and
including
and,
one here in Manchester.
And when they close, and you look at the membership of these charter schools, look at who's going to these charter schools. They're not taking care of those who were supposedly demonstrating the most need. That's not happening.
No,
That's just not happening.
they want the kids whose parents can contribute to the school's finances.
Well, that's
Isn't that about it?
Well, I think that's the audience that you look at. Now, there have been some that have been successful, but I think the basis of a free society is a free public education. And if you do away with that, and if you take resources away from that, if you dilute those resources, you dilute the opportunity that everybody should have in order to succeed in this life. That's why I think it's an immoral situation. I think we've lost our moral compass. We really have. I look at the nation as a whole, and I'm frightened.
Yeah.
You know, I truly
I am
am.
too, Lou. I am too, Lou.
I was in. Just got out of college in 1965 when the Civil Rights Act was passed, and
Yeah.
it isn't that long ago when voting rights and civil rights were just happening,
Yes.
and here we are now, and we're trying to backtrack.
Feels like we're
It-
taking a
it-
step
yeah,
a big
yeah,
step
a
backwards.
big step backwards.
Yeah, big
Yeah.
step
And
backwards.
that
Yeah.
should worry us. And how do you do it? It's power. Where's the power? The power's in the legislation that you promulgate, and it's in the budget because you fund. And if you fund
The budget tells you what your priorities really are.
it
You
Yeah.
does exactly.
can have all the
Absolutely.
rhetoric
Yeah.
you want, but the budget is where you set your priorities.
Exactly.
That brings me to another subject I'd like you to find people to discuss. the non-budget items that get into the budget.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
right.
there
Yeah.
we've got those.
There we go.
Yeah, they'll be
I mean,
there.
you think the budget is about how we're going to raise and spend $13 billion over the next 2 years?
Right.
And we've talked about some of those issues. Why don't we fund the child protection services that we need? You know, why are we helping the investors that lost some money in the Ponzi scheme at FRM? But let's talk about the things that are not budgetary that somehow get in the budget. At least one of which I kind of like, I must say. But there's many of them. So you want to go in some of these things, Mary Jane?
Well, there certainly came out of the House. There were certain certain things in the budget. The budget is what everyone thinks of as a budget, with all the numbers, and the numbers have to add up right, and all of that. And that's House Bill 1. And House Bill 2
Right,
is a lot of policy.
right.
House Bill 2 makes those numbers work.
Yeah, it makes those
does.
numbers
Puts
work.
those numbers into words so
Right.
they can work.
And I was chair of the Finance Committee in the House for 2 terms, and Lou has been chair in the Senate for probably more than 2 terms.
I've had 3 terms
Three
as chair,
terms.
chair of the Finance Committee.
And of course, there was a lot of policy in the House Bill 2, the companion bill to House Bill 1. But we always tried that it had to have a nexus to the budget. It had to have something, it had to make the numbers work. It had to, without the words, you couldn't make the numbers work. But this budget, there were a number of items put into the budget that really had nothing to do with the budget.
Right,
They were just strictly
policy issues, yes.
and at least one of them, well, both of them actually, had their own standalone bills that had public hearings and could have gone ahead on their own.
Or not.
Or not, or
Right.
not. They could have been voted down, or they could have gone ahead. But they would have stood on their own. But by putting them in the budget, that was really sort of a maneuver to be sure that they were going to get passed, because the budget is our most important document.
Yes.
And it's we don't want to come up on July 1st and have to shut down government because we don't have a budget. We want,
Or a
everybody-
continuing resolution.
or continuing resolution, but to put those kinds of things in the budget really starts something that I don't think we've done in the past.
Really?
And
I understand this was not so new, but you're suggesting at least this is new in the degree and
Well, I
certitude.
think the degree and the kind
degree.
of
I think so.
legislation that's been wrapped into the budget.
Right.
For example, House Bill 544,
544.
Yeah.
right? The divisive concepts bill,
Right.
which
Yeah.
is just terrible.
And the chairman of the committee, of the House committee, basically told us, the committee members, in a public meeting, it wasn't in private, he basically told us that there were these pieces of legislation that he had to have in the budget in order to get the budget to pass.
Yes.
And it's on record, he said that, not only about the divisive concepts and 544, but also about the executive powers of the governor. Both of those, he said he had to have those in the budget to get it passed.
Yeah.
And they really do not have any budgetary consequences.
No financial consequence.
No financial consequences. I don't think you could build a case for either of them with a financial consequence.
Yeah. Well, what are some of the things that are in there that, in this, which I'm now learning, I did not realize this, but it seems very important, is kind of an unprecedented degree of using the budget trailer bill, the words that make the numbers work. What are some of those things that are still going forward, and how do you think this is going to come out? I mean, this bill is, you're going to vote on the Senate when?
Tomorrow.
Tomorrow.
We'll vote on.
It'll
we'll
probably
vote on
be a
this
party
budget.
line vote, I'm guessing,
I'm sure it'll be a party line vote.
which means it'll pass.
It'll pass.
And then it'll come back over to you folks, and you probably will, I think the likelihood you have 3 choices, concur, non-concur, or ask for a committee of conference. I would think the third would be the most probable outcome.
I
Go to
would
a
think so.
very,
I- yeah.
very important committee of conference, the last thing that happens in the legislative
Yeah.
thing before we all sign off on everything.
Yeah. And it'll be in the hands of the majority to make that decision about whether they're going to concur or non-concur.
Right.
Or committee of conference, certainly committee of conference would seem the most responsible thing to do. And then
Yeah.
see how it would work out. I think a lot of my Republican colleagues in the House are very committed to the budget they sent the Senate.
Oh, I think so.
And the Finance Committee chair of the House actually told the Senate
Yes,
Finance
in-
Committee,
in no uncertain terms.
don't fool with my budget.
Right.
It's coming your way, and here it comes, and
These things have to be
these
in the
things
budget
have to be in the budget.
for it to pass.
And the stickiest wicket, to use the old analogy from English sports, is what the governor's authority for managing an emergency. Is emergency powers, or is it more than that?
I think the divisive concepts, the way it was structured,
Yeah.
either
The critical race.
yeah,
Right.
well, right, and the way that Senator Bradley has redone it, I think, made it worse.
And some
to
of
be
the
honest
issues
with you.
around family planning.
Yeah, oh, family planning, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely,
Yes.
absolutely.
Absolutely.
All of the issues that deal with family planning
Mm-hmm.
and deal with late-term abortion and so forth.
When you say family planning, this is the thing that would determine that abortion would be illegal in New Hampshire after 22
24 weeks.
24
I think it
24
is.
weeks.
The
Yeah.
House sent it over. It was different the way the House sent it over.
Think of the criminal aspect that they're asserting that the doctor can be charged with.
Right.
I mean, we have had for years, the best protection for women in the country.
Yes, we have.
For
Yes.
years and
It's
years
kind of
and
with
years.
our live free or die thing, you know. People
It
should
is.
be able to have some freedom of choice here.
It fits directly
Yeah.
with our mantra.
That's
live-
why
live
it's so
free or die.
surprising that the House has inserted some of these things like that in the budget,
Yes.
because philosophically, libertarians usually don't try to restrain, don't try to restrict.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, they've
Yeah.
been allied with some
Yes.
very progressive liberal types on that sort
Right.
of thing.
Yeah, it's a direct refute
Yeah.
of what New Hampshire has
Right.
been in the past, and
Yeah.
talk about a sticky wicket, and those bills are incorporated. They're in the budget.
They're in the
Yeah,
budget.
yeah.
They are
Yeah.
in the budget. That's
As well
policy.
as funding has been reduced.
Yes.
For family
And-
planning
and
also.
Yeah.
Family plan reduced to almost nothing.
Yes.
So nothing we did this year moved us any further forward on family and medical medical paid leave as an opportunity.
The governor's plan is in the Senate version of the
Yes.
budget.
Right.
His plan for
which is
family
kind of
leave.
a I don't know. His plan is somehow it's all voluntary, which really means
Right.
it won't amount to much, I guess,
yeah,
right?
yeah. But it's in the budget, and the House didn't want it in the budget.
No, the House took it out of.
House took it out.
His budget included it when it came to the House, and the House took it out. It would cover state employees,
Yes.
Yeah.
and then it was voluntary. There's a voluntary,
Yeah. Well,
but it will not. It will not expand paid family leave
Right.
for the average worker in New Hampshire.
Jesus, I
For
don't.
most people who
I
need
just
it.
don't understand why we can't get that done, because most of the democracies in the Western world, and I'm sure probably in other countries as well, they do provide this for people. I just don't get it. But and I don't get why we don't have health care for people,
Well,
except as a part of your employment
Right.
contract.
well, the evolution of healthcare is something that we ought to spend a whole.
We could do a whole we could spend a
program
long
on.
time on that for
the
sure.
fact that
Yeah.
as a youngster, just a quick anecdote, we never had health insurance. We never knew anything about health insurance, but we had a family doctor
Right.
who would come to the house if you were sick and who would
Yep.
take care of you.
That was my dad.
Right, that
Maybe
was-
not for
that
your-
was-
that was
That's what my
Dr.
dad did.
That was right, Dr. Backus. Well, ours,
Yeah.
ours was a little Italian doctor from the same town in Italy as my parents' family,
Yeah.
and he would Dr. Costanza. He would come to the house and visit.
Yeah.
So the evolution of healthcare has been. Remember, Medicaid and Medicare came about in the '60s.
Yeah.
Bob, in the '60s.
Yeah.
Prior to that, no, we had little, if anything.
And Ronald Reagan denounced Medicare as socialism.
Right.
Yes.
And then, of course, we started third-party coverage for
Yeah.
when you had a job. That was part
Yeah.
of the benefit package
Yeah.
and so forth. But again, that's a subject that really we should spend a lot of time on, and
Yeah.
you should spend a lot of time on it. But
You know, another thing that's been part of this trailer bill, so-called, where the bill that makes in words what happens with the numbers in House Bill 1, which is the actual budget, is the Department of Energy. Apparently, that's gonna
gonna
happen,
fly.
right? Does that
It's-
seem like
it's-
that's likely to?
it's a
be-
done deal.
It came over. I mean, the governor brought it into House Bill 1, House Bill 1 and 2, and
Yeah.
then it was left in by the House, and has gone
It's
now
in.
on to the Senate, and I believe it's in.
It's in the Senate bill. It's in the Senate bill.
That's
right.
gonna, it looks like that's going to happen then.
Yes, it is. Now, I know that many people were for
Yeah.
this because they thought this was a real step forward and bring
Yeah,
things to.
I did.
things
Although
together.
I've said here before that I just don't understand why they left the Department of Environmental Services entirely out of this thing. It's mostly taking the PUC and making it a much smaller
Yes, yes.
agency
Right.
that only
Right.
decides rate cases and doesn't have any role in setting energy policy. And I think that's all right. I'm not sure you both would agree with that, but I think that's all right. But it certainly has nothing to do. It's another example. Something has nothing to do with the requirements or revenues or expenditures. It gets us supposedly a small savings by moving all these people over to the Department of Energy that are now at the PUC. But it's really not a
Yeah.
budget item at all.
Well, I actually didn't support it being in the budget, but I think I could make a case that it does have budgetary ramifications. It does affect the budget because you have to budget to that new department.
Yeah,
You have a new department,
Right.
you have to build a budget for the new department.
but most of that budget will come over from the PUC along with a lot
It
of the
will,
people.
but it still has to be built. I mean,
Yeah.
there still has to be,
Yeah.
and that happens in a number of areas when we do something differently than we have done before.
Yeah.
I don't really have trouble with those kinds of
Yeah.
things in the budget.
Well, the thing that worries me is who's going to be the commissioner of this Department of
that's-
Energy,
Well.
and what's his or
that's
her agenda going to be about moving
Right.
us forward, because we are lagging badly. You know, one of the things that the Republicans in the House were very insistent upon was that they wanted to take down the governor's very large emergency powers that we've seen demonstrated, for now
Right.
14 months or so. And they wanted to really cut back on the governor's part, pretty much very strong power to declare states of emergency for, I don't know what it is, 21 days, and keep renewing it and renewing it and renewing it. And a lot of them were adamant that this could not continue. If this budget passes, will enough of them be in a position to oppose the budget and maybe prevent it from becoming law?
I believe you've
It's-
changed it
yeah,
to
we changed it.
14 days, right?
Right. It's been changed.
They
Oh, yeah.
have
It's
changed
much
it. Now, will
different.
that?
Is the governor going to accept that?
Well, who knows?
I don't know about what the governor would be doing about that, but and I don't know where I know the House was very strong. The House Republicans, that was one of the pieces they were very strong about, and
Yeah.
whether or not this change will,
Yeah, Tippett.
whether they'll like it or not, or whether they'll be able to go along with it, I don't know. But that was one of the pieces that they wanted in the budget.
Yeah. Remember that both Mary Jane and I were parties to a suit
Yeah, right.
against the governor for not letting the fiscal committee
Yes.
be part and parcel
Yes,
of the
yes.
allocation
Right.
of funds. And
Yep.
at that period in time, the governor took $1.25 billion and had the ultimate authority to spend every cent of it.
Yeah.
Imagine that.
Yeah.
But none of these folks who have now are so concerned about the governor's powers ever came forward to
Right.
me or Lou, I don't
Right,
know,
yeah.
maybe they came to you, Lou, they didn't come to me, to say, give us any support
Right.
with that lawsuit.
Right, exactly.
We
Nobody.
had no Republican.
Really?
Right.
No, we had no.
Well, that shows it's all
so-
politics.
Well, it seems strange to me that
Plays a
after
role,
we
for
had
sure.
after we had brought the lawsuit and we had worked so hard on it, that no one came forward, and then now when they were the majority,
Becomes so important.
it became so important.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, it's just
Interesting, interesting.
Very, very interesting.
So if there becomes a committee of conference, which seems to me highly probable there will be, I imagine you will be a member of the conference committee?
I did not vote for the budget coming out of the House, and sometimes they use that as who's going to be on the committee of conference on a bill.
Oh, really?
Is if everyone
Were there any
voted. So
Democrats who did that could be on
No,
it?
No.
I don't believe there were. No,
So
I
the committee
don't
of
think
conference might be all Republicans from
Well,
the House?
I don't know. But in the Senate, I'm sure you probably would have. a
It would
Democrat.
have, I thought that there was a rule that you had to have one minority member when you started the committee of
Yeah.
conference. Doesn't mean there has to be
Yeah.
one minority when you finish
Yeah.
it, because
Well,
that
we'll
They
s-
can replace
yeah.
people, yeah, they can
First
haul
yeah.
people out if they're not
could be
doing what the
replaced
leadership
right away,
wants,
yeah.
right?
And it seems to me that's how this thing's going to go if they go to conference. I trying to figure this out, trying to think this through, and I've been thinking about this. I've had a lot of time on my hands the last few days, and in thinking it through, I say, if if the changes in this budget give the governor the latitude that he wants, and I think many of them do, with regard to Planned Parenthood, he wants it both ways. He gets it both ways in this budget. He gets it both ways.
In what sense? He gets what he wants in what way?
He gets what he wants, because you have to come to governor and council to get the Title 10 money for Planned Parenthood, and for sure the council will not approve it, and that's a 6-month period. So
I see.
you can let it become law. Let that happen, knowing full well that the council's going to reject it, and you can say, I didn't sign it because this wasn't in it, wasn't taken care of in it.
Right.
So there seems to be, in my opinion, a strategy that's coming to develop where he could get a budget and let it become law without his signature, and look like a champion
Yeah.
in many ways.
Yeah.
Now, again, I'm just thinking it through. That's my thought process.
Certainly an option.
Oh, I think it's a real big option this time.
Yeah, yeah.
And of course, the other option is the fact that the House will reject it,
Right.
and will not ask for a committee conference. Will just non-concur. Then you'll get a continuing resolution, and you have to go back and do. We did this in the last budget
Yeah.
cycle. Went back again and was.
What do you think the chances of that are?
I really don't know what I don't know what's been going on behind the scenes,
Right,
and that's
exactly.
that's where
Yeah,
you don't know.
that's the problem with being
who's
in the
been-
minority. You don't
who's
get to
been
know that
Who's
stuff.
Right.
talking to who?
Right.
I will say that the governor did come out pretty much right after the House passed the budget, and he spoke pretty strongly
Yeah, he did.
against the House budget.
Yeah.
Mostly over the diminishment of his emergency powers.
Well, but other pieces in it.
And he didn't like a lot of it.
When we were about halfway in through the budget, our work, we had about 6 weeks. I'd say about around the third week, we got a letter from the governor.
Right.
It was actually addressed. You and I
You
were.
and I,
we
right.
were. We were addressed on the letter, saying that with the revenues coming in strong, because he already knew by then that the revenues were coming in
Right.
strong, that he had $70 million
More.
that he would like to put into the budget, and he wanted to put in things like the 22 child protection workers. He would have then added those. The House rejected it. They didn't. I mean, we never really dealt with the. We never really. The Republicans never really looked at the letter or moved on his suggestions that were in the letter. But it was interesting that we were halfway through the budget, and he came forth with that letter, which didn't get any action. But
It's interesting, though.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, my goodness. How does the budget treat our cities and towns in terms of revenue sharing and resuming, school district aid for, new or expanded schools?
Well, there is some money in for building aid, that you're paying off the old building aid, and there is money for building aid. As we said, there's $100 million reduction in the SWET, the statewide property tax. That's gone, and it's been replaced by other money. So
Yeah.
that they'll be saying that they are sending more money back and more money for roads and bridges and so forth and so on. But the municipal aid is not there. So there's $40 million that's out the window that we gave last time, and of course. When you look at the education funding, when you look at the grants, based on the formula, there's less money going back to all the communities, and in the second year, this $100 million reduction occurs.
Yes.
And then what are we going to? How are you going to face the lawsuit?
Well,
That's pending.
I mean, the Conval.
The Conval,
Conval.
which has now been
Conval, which is a lot more than Conval.
well,
now.
now it's been joined by
Yeah,
district after
yeah.
district after district.
Yeah, yeah.
And what I think is you're giving more credence to the suit.
Yeah.
Why did you make these significant changes? If
That's a
things
good
were,
point.
Things
Yeah.
were okay.
That's a good point.
So you're
Yeah.
the lawyer. You tell me. But let me just sort of wrap things up here on the finance issue and tell you this. It is amazing to me that the House budget, the Senate budget, and the governor's budget are within $200,000 of each other in terms of the aggregate spend. So the
Interesting.
focus of these budgets was don't spend any more than $13,500,000.
right. Yeah.
And if you look at the general fund money, the difference between the governor, the House, and the Senate, it's $200,000.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
It is amazing.
I did not realize that.
Well, and until you look at this thing, and I've been looking at this for years, look at the tail end and look at the number that you're back into.
Right.
That number's set. I'm not going to go anywhere over this number.
Right.
How do you arrive there? You arrive there at manipulating the budget. In this sense, you took unspent 21 revenues and you used them to fund things so that they didn't occur in the budget. You were funding
Right.
them here. There's $100 million there.
Right.
That's accounted for. So when you look at this game that we're all playing, you understand the numbers, and the numbers tell you that there was, the end line was set. It was going to be this number. It was not going to be any more than this number, because the mantra is we're not spenders, right? We're not big spenders.
Right. I always understand that New Hampshire has had for decades now, I guess, what was called a structural deficit. We
Yes.
don't define our needs and then decide how we can fund those needs to the extent we can. We decide what money we're going to have and then allocate it as we see fit to meet those needs, whether it's adequate to meet those needs or not. And I guess this budget kind of continues that tradition. Is that right?
Yes, and I think one thing that I always find discouraging is that departments are given instructions by the
Targets.
governor of how to craft their budget. Let's say he has to be flat. Let's say it has to be flat. Well, it's very hard in government to have a flat budget because, of course, you're going to have pay increases. You're going to have
Yeah.
and there are going to be expenses you have to address.
Yeah.
But they also develop something called prioritized needs, and each department does that. So they craft their budget within the governor's guidelines, but then they do have prioritized needs that they have available to show what some of the things are that they most need. For instance, the 22 social workers were
Right.
on the prioritized needs list, okay? In the House, we did not look at we did not use the prioritized needs list as much as I feel like we should have used that to really understand what the needs of the state are. So the information is there to know what you should be budgeting, but it's not always used.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that really bothers bothers me is the amount of money that's lapsed in each biennium. Now, that's money that we appropriated, that we had definite targets to spend that money. And if you don't spend it, the question is, well, did you really need it? And then the question arises, and they'll say, well, we couldn't spend it because we couldn't do this, we couldn't do that, we couldn't do that. But when you lapse $70 million, $75 million, that's not good.
It really adds up.
And I think this governor has used the lapse, and he's driven the lapse.
Yes, and he had a hiring freeze
Yes, for a
that
long.
lasted a very long time. And I can understand where when the pandemic started in, April, May, no one knew what was going to happen. People were scared. They thought the
Sure.
revenues were going to drop off. I can certainly understand why you'd have a hiring freeze. But once it became pretty clear that the revenues were coming in, that hiring freeze could have been lifted.
Yeah.
But instead, the hiring freeze was there
Remained.
for many, many, many months. And when we were doing the budget, every department came in and told us how their vacancy rate was so high
Right.
because they had lost people and were not able to refill them during the hiring freeze.
Sure.
Yeah.
So that was sort of setting up a situation where there were a lot of lapsed funds.
Yes, yeah, there's no question that was the case.
So here's my last thought for you maybe to discuss, because we're pretty much at the end here. I told you this show goes by pretty fast. And that is, you people have made, two real experts have made some really trenchant points here. And yet I don't think the public's getting this somehow. I mean, I think the story of the Union Leader, Kevin Landrigan, a fine reporter, but if you only read the front page, you'd think this was just the greatest budget ever.
The
And-
devil is
devil's
always in the
always
detail.
Always in the
detail.
detail.
I mean,
Always in the detail.
I just hope you'll be out talking about the needs that we have that are not being met in the budget, even though the revenues would make it easy to do it with a little goodwill. I mean, we don't have to raise new taxes. We could just keep our existing taxes, not cut the business profits tax, the business enterprise, which nobody really thinks that we need. Businesses are doing fine. Not eliminate the interest and dividends tax, those sorts of things. So I'm hoping that you'll both be heard on this. You write a good many good op-eds. Maybe you should do another one.
I'll do the best I can with what I've got. But I think, listen, give credit to Senator Daniels, chairman of the Finance Committee in the Senate, a decent guy, very conservative, very different opinion than I have. But he's a decent guy. He's very careful at how he treats people. He treats them very kindly
That's good.
and so forth.
That's good.
But look, at the sneaky thing was the reduction of the tolls in the damn budget, which really burns me. Peter Bragdon was the guy that started this when he was president of the Senate. He put it in the budget. Now it's in the budget. The reduction of the last reduction of those Merrimack tolls. That shouldn't be in the budget.
Yeah, Merrimack advocated
Right.
for itself very well on
Yeah.
that issue.
It sure did.
So I just want to thank you, Mary Jane, for coming down and joining us. It was a real pleasure to have
Thank
you
you
here. And I
for
thank you for
asking
your
me.
service.
Thank you,
And
Mary
I
Jane.
hope we'll have you back soon, Willow. It's always a pleasure. And I'll be back next week with Mike Farley, and I'm hoping maybe Rennie Cushing. I hope he's doing okay. One of my dear friends. I'm so concerned that he's doing all he's doing, but I'm sure he's doing okay.